We have explained that the Church proscribed initiation because it was indignant at the profanations of the Gnosis. When Muhammad armed Eastern fanaticism against faith, he opposed savage and warlike credulity to the piety which is ignorant but which prays. His successors set foot in Europe and threatened to overrun it speedily. The Christian said, "Providence is chastising us," and the Muslims answered, "Fatality is on our side." The Jewish Kabbalists, who were in dread of being burnt as sorcerers in countries called Catholic, sought an asylum among the Arabs, for these in their eyes were heretics but not idolaters. They admitted some of them to a knowledge of their mysteries, and Islam, which had already conquered by force, was before long in a position to hope that it might prevail also by science over those whom educated Araby termed in its disdain the barbarians of the West. To onslaughts of physical force the genius of France opposed the strokes of its own terrific hammer. Before the flowing tide of Mohammedan armies a mail-clad finger had traced a clear line and a mighty voice of victory cried to the flood, "Thou shalt go no further." The genius of science raised up Raymund Lully, and he reclaimed the heritage of Solomon for that Saviour who was the son of David. It was he who for the first time called the children of blind faith to the splendors of universal knowledge. The pseudo-scholars, and the people who are wise in their own conceit, continue to speak with scorn of this truly great man, but the popular instinct has avenged him. Romance and legend have taken up his story, with the result that he is pictured as one impassioned like Abelard, initiated like Faust, an alchemist even as Hermes, a man of penitence and learning like Saint Jerome, a rover after the manner of the wandering Jew, a martyr in fine like Saint Stephen, and one who was glorious in death almost as the Saviour of the world. Let us make our beginning with the romance. It is one of the most touching and beautiful that have come within our knowledge. On a certain Sunday, in the year 1250, a beautiful and accomplished lady, named Ambrosia di Castello, originally of Genoa, went, as she was accustomed, to hear Mass in the church of Palma, a town in the island of Majorca. A mounted cavalier of distinguished appearance and richly dressed, who was passing at the time in the street, noticed the lady and pulled up as one thunderstruck. She entered the church, quickly disappearing in the shadow of the great porch. The cavalier, quite unconscious of what he did, spurred his horse and rode after her into the midst of the affrighted worshippers. Great was the astonishment and scandal. The cavalier was well known. He was the Seigneur Raymund Lully, seneschal of the Isles and mayor of the palace. He had a wife and 3 children, while Ambrosia di Castello was also married and enjoyed, moreover, an irreproachable reputation. Raymund Lully passed therefore for a great libertine. His equestrian entrance into the church of Palma was noised over the whole town, and Ambrosia, in the greatest confusion, sought the advice of her husband. He was apparently a man of sense, and he did not consider his wife insulted because her beauty had turned the head of a young and brilliant nobleman. He proposed that Ambrosia should cure her admirer by a folly as grotesque as his own. Meanwhile, Raymund Lully had written already to the lady, to excuse, or rather to accuse himself still further. What had prompted him, he said, was strange, supernatural, irresistible. He respected her honor and the affections which, he knew, belonged to another, but he had been overwhelmed. He felt that his imprudence required for its expiation high self-devotion, great sacrifices, miracles to be accomplished, the penitence of a stylite and the feats of a knight-errant. Ambrosia answered, "To respond adequately to a love which you term supernatural would require an immortal existence. If this love be sacrificed heroically to our respective duties during the lives of those who are dear to each of us, it will, beyond all doubt, create for itself an eternity at that moment when conscience and the world will permit us to love one another. It is said that there is an elixir of life. Seek to discover it, and when you are certain that you have succeeded, come and see me. Till then, live for your wife and your children, as I also will live for the husband whom I love, and if you meet me in the street make no sign of recognition." It was evidently a gracious congé, which put off her lover till doomsday, but he refused to understand it as such, and from that day forth the brilliant noble disappeared to make room for the grave and thoughtful alchemist. Don Juan had become Faust. Many years passed away. The wife of Raymund Lully died. Ambrosia di Castello in her turn became a widow. But the alchemist appeared to have forgotten her and to be absorbed only in his sublime work. At length, one day, the widow being alone, Raymund Lully was announced, and there entered the apartment a bald and emaciated old man, who held in his hand a phial filled with a bright and ruddy elixir. He advanced with unsteady step, seeking her with his eyes. The object which they sought was before them, but he did not recognize her, who in his imagination had remained always young and beautiful. "It is I," she said at length. "What would you with me?" At the accents of that voice, the alchemist startled violently. He recognized her whom he had thought fondly to find unchanged. Casting himself on his knees at her feet, he offered her the phial, saying, "Take it, drink it, it is life. 30 years of my own existence are comprised in it, but I have tried it, and I know that it is the elixir of immortality." "What?" asked Ambrosia, with a sad smile, "have you yourself drunk it?" "For 2 months," replied Raymund, "after having taken a quantity of the elixir equal to that which is contained here, I have abstained from all other nourishment. The pangs of hunger have tormented me, but not only have I not died, I am conscious within me of an unparalleled accession of strength and life." "I believe you," said Ambrosia, "but this elixir, which preserves existence, is powerless to restore lost youth. My poor friend, look at yourself," and she held up a mirror before him. Raymund Lully recoiled, for it is affirmed by the legend that he had never surveyed himself in this manner during the 30 years of his labors. "And now, Raymund," continued Ambrosia, "look at me," and she unbound her hair, which was white as snow. Then, loosening the clasps of her robe, she exposed to him her breast, which was almost eaten away by a cancer. "Is it this," she asked piteously, "which you wish to immortalize?" Then, seeing the consternation of the alchemist, she continued, "For 30 years I have loved you, and I would not doom you to a perpetual prison in the body of an infirm old man. In your turn, do not condemn me. Spare me this death which you term life. Let me suffer the change which is necessary before I can live again truly. Let us renew our nature with an eternal youth. I have no wish for your elixir, which prolongs only the night of the tomb. I aspire to immortality." Raymund Lully thereupon cast down the phial, which was broken on the ground. "I deliver you," he said, "and for your sake I remain in prison. Live in the immortality of heaven, while I am condemned forever to a living death on this earth." Then, hiding his face in his hands, he went away weeping. Some months after, a monk of the Order of Saint Francis assisted Ambrosia di Castello in her last moments. This monk was the alchemist, Raymund Lully. The romance ends here and the legend follows. This legend merges several bearers at different periods of the name Raymund Lully into a single personality, and thus endows the repentant alchemist with a few centuries of existence and expiation. On the day when the unfortunate adept should have expired naturally, he experienced all the agonies of dissolution. Then, at the supreme crisis, he felt life again take possession of his frame, like the vulture of Prometheus resuming its banquet. The Savior of the world, who had stretched forth his hand towards him, returned sorrowfully into heaven, and Raymund Lully found himself still on earth, with no hope of dying. He betook himself to prayer, and devoted his existence to good works. God granted him all graces save that of death, but of what profit are the others in the absence of that which should complete and crown them all? One day the tree of knowledge was shown to him, laden with its luminous fruits. He understood being and its harmonies. He divined the Kabbalah. He established the foundations and sketched the plan of an universal science, from which time he was saluted as the illuminated doctor. So did he obtain glory, that fatal recompense of toil which God, in his mercy, seldom confers upon great men till after their death, because it intoxicates and poisons the living. But Raymund Lully, who could not by death give place to the glory after, might have occasion to fear that it would perish before himself, and meanwhile it could seem to him only a derision of his immortal misfortune. He knew how to make gold, so that he might purchase the world and all its kingdoms, yet he could not assure to himself the humblest tomb. He was the pauper of immortality. Everywhere he went begging for death, and no one was able to give it him. The courtly nobleman had become an absorbed alchemist, the alchemist a monk. The monk became preacher, philosopher, ascetic, saint, and, last of all, missionary. He engaged hand to hand with the learned men of Arabia. He battled victoriously against Islamism, and had everything to fear from the fury of its professors. Everything to fear. This means that he had something to hope, and that which he hoped for was death. He engaged a young Arab of the most fanatical class as his attendant, and posed before him as the scourge of the religion of Muhammad. The Arab assassinated his master, which was what he expected, but Raymund Lully did not die. It was the assassin that he would fain have forgiven who killed himself in despair at his failure, so that conscience had an added burden instead of deliverance and peace. He was scarcely cured of his wounds when he embarked for Tunis, in which place he preached Christianity openly. But the Bey in admiration of his learning and his courage protected him against the madness of the crowd and caused him to re-embark with all his books. Before long he returned to the same parts, preaching at Bone, Buja and other African towns. The Moslems were stupefied and feared to lay hands upon him. In the end he revisited Tunis and collecting the people in the streets, he proclaimed that, though driven from the place, he had come back to confound the impious doctrines of Muhammad and to die for Jesus Christ. This time there was no protection possible. The enraged people hunted him, a veritable insurrection broke out. He fled, to encourage them further. Already he was broken by many blows, pouring with blood, covered with wounds, and yet he continued to live. He sank finally, buried, literally speaking, under a mountain of stones. On the same night, says the legend, two Genoese merchants, Stephen Colin and Louis de Pasturga, sailing over the open sea, beheld a great light shining from the port of Tunis. They changed their course and, approaching the shore, discovered a mound of stones, which diffused far and near this miraculous splendor. They landed in great astonishment, and finally discovered the body of Raymund Lully, mangled but still breathing. He was taken on board the ship and carried to Majorca, where in sight of his native land the martyr was permitted to expire. God set him free by a miracle and his penance was so finished. Such is the odyssey of the fabulous Raymund Lully. Let us come now to the historical realities. Raymund Lully, the philosopher and adept, being the one who deserved the title of illuminated doctor, was the son of that seneschal of Majorca who was made famous by his ill-starred passion for Ambrosia di Castello. He did not discover the elixir of immortality, but he made gold in England for King Edward III, and this gold was called aurum Raymundi. There are extant certain very rare coins which are called Raymundans by experts. Louis Faguer identifies these with the rose nobles which were struck during the reign in question, and suggests, a little frivolously, that the alchemy of Raymund Lully was only a sophistication of gold which would be difficult to detect at a period when chemical processes were much less perfect than they are at the present day. This notwithstanding, he recognizes the scientific importance of Lully and gives his judgment concerning him as follows. Raymund Lully, whose genius embraced all branches of human knowledge, and who brought together in the Ars Magna a vast system of philosophy, summarizing the encyclopedic principles of science as it then stood, could not fail to bequeath a valuable heritage to chemists. He perfected and described carefully various compounds which are used widely in chemistry. We owe him the preparation of carbonate of potassium by means of tartar and by wood ashes, the rectification of spirits of wine, the preparation of essential oils, the cupellation of silver, and the preparation of sweet mercury. Other scientists, feeling sure that the rose nobles were pure as gold, have speculated that, having regard to the very imperfect processes of practical chemistry during the Middle Ages, such transmutations as those of Raymund Lully, and indeed other adepts, were merely the separation of the gold found in silver mines, and purified by means of antimony, which is actually indicated, in a great number of Hermetic symbols, as the efficient and chief element in the powder of projection. We agree with them that chemistry was non-existent at the period in question, and we may add that it was created by adepts or rather that the adepts, while keeping to themselves those synthetic secrets which were the treasure of the magical sanctuaries, instructed their contemporaries as to some of the analytical processes. These were afterwards perfected, but they have not as yet led men of science to reach that ancient synthesis which constitutes Hermetic philosophy, in the proper sense of the term. In his philosophical testament, Raymund Lully has set forth all the principles of this science, but in a veiled manner, following the practice and indeed the duty of adepts. He also composed a key to the testament mentioned, and finally a key to the key or, more definitely, a codicil, which is in our opinion the most important of his writings on alchemy. Its principles and modes of procedure have nothing in common either with the sophistication of pure metals or with the separation of alloys. As a theory, it is in conformity with the principles of Geber and as a practice with those of Arnaldus de Villanova. In respect of doctrine it is in conformity with the most exalted ideas of the Kabbalah. Those earnest minds, who refuse to be discouraged by the discredit into which ignorance brings the great things, should study Kabbalistically the codicil of Raymund Lully, if they seek to carry on that research of the Absolute which was followed by the greatest men of genius in the elder world. The whole life of this preeminent adept, the first initiate after Saint John who was devoted to the hierarchic apostolate of Holy Orthodoxy, his entire life, we repeat, was passed in pious foundations, in preachings, in immense scientific labors. Thus, in 1276, he established at Palma a college of Franciscans dedicated to the study of Oriental languages, and Arabic especially, with the object of refuting the works of Mohammedan doctors and of preaching the Christian faith among the Moors. John XXI confirmed this institution by a pastoral letter dated from Viterbo on December 16, in the first year of his pontificate. From 1293 to 1311, Lully solicited and obtained from Pope Nicholas IV and from the kings of France, Sicily, Cyprus and Majorca, the establishment of many other colleges for the same purpose. Wherever he went he gave instructions in his great art, which is an universal synthesis of human knowledge, and has as its prime object the institution of one language among men as also one mode of thought. He visited Paris and there astonished the most learned doctors. Afterwards he crossed over to Spain, tarried at Compluat, where he founded a central academy for the study of languages and sciences. He reformed a number of convents, went on to Italy and recruited soldiers for a new military order, the institution of which he advocated at the very Council of Vienna which condemned the Templars. The Catholic science and the true initiation of St. John were intended thereby to rescue the protecting sword of the Temple from faithless hands. The great ones of this world derided poor Raymund Lully, and yet in their own despite they did all that he desired. This illuminated personality, termed by derision Raymund the Fantastic, seems to have been Pope of Popes and King of Kings. He was poor as Job and gave alms to sovereigns. He was called a fool, and he was of that order of folly which confounds sages. The greatest politician of the period, Cardinal Ximenes, whose mind was as vast as it was serious, never spoke of him except as the divine Raymund Lully and the most enlightened doctor. He died in 1314, according to Geneberd, or in 1315, according to the author of the preface to the Meditations of the Hermit Blackern. He was 80 years old, and the end of his toilsome and holy existence came on the festival of the martyrdom of Saint Peter and Saint Paul. A disciple of the great Kabbalists, Raymund Lully sought to establish an absolute and universal philosophy by substituting for the conventional abstractions of systems a fixed notion of natural actualities and by substituting a simple and natural mode of expression for the ambiguous terms of scholasticism. He condemned the definitions of the scholars at his period because they perpetuated disputes by their inexactitude and amphibology. According to Aristotle, man is a reasonable animal, but it may be replied that he is not an animal and is only rarely reasonable. Moreover, the words animal and reasonable cannot be brought into harmony. A fool, in this sense, would not be a man, and so forth. Raymund Lully defined things by their right names and not by their synonyms or approximations. Afterwards he explained the names by etymology. To the question, "What is man?" he would therefore reply that the word, in its general acceptation, signifies the state of being human, but taken in a particular acceptation it designates the human personality. What, however, is this human personality? Originally, it is the personality which God made by breathing life into a body compounded of earth, humus. Literally it is you. It is I. It is Peter, Paul, and so on. Those who were accustomed to scientific jargon protested to the illuminated doctor that anyone could talk like this, that on the basis of such a method the whole world might pose as learned, and that popular common sense would be preferred before the doctrine of academies. "That is just what I wish," was the answer of Raymund Lully in his great simplicity. Hence the reproach of puerility made against his enlightened theory. And puerile it was in a sense, but with the puerility of his counsel who said, "Except ye become as one of these little ones, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven." Is not the kingdom of heaven also that of science, seeing that the celestial life of God and men is but understanding and love? The design of Raymund Lully was to set the Christianized Kabbalah against the fatalistic magia of the Arabs, Egyptian traditions against those of India, the magic of light against black magic. He testified that, in the last days, the doctrines of Antichrist would be a materialized realism and that there would be a recrudescence of all the monstrosities of evil magic. Hence he sought to prepare minds for the return of Enoch, or otherwise for the final revelation of that science the key of which is in the hieroglyphical alphabets of Enoch. This harmonizing light of reason and faith is to precede the messianic and universal reign of Christianity on earth. So was Lully a great prophet for true Kabbalists and seers, while for skeptics who at least can respect exalted characters and noble aspirations, he was a sublime dreamer.